Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review the movie Mary Poppins Returns. So, before I can even begin this movie review, I must admit that I have never seen the full version of Mary Poppins. The original, that is. So, going into this was a little bit interesting. I got to see it as just this movie. I did not have to think about comparing it to the original. I did see Saving Mr. Banks, which is sort of about the original Mary Poppins, about the making of that movie. So I have that knowledge, but I have not seen the original. With that being said, I would like to just review Mary Poppins Returns. So, we start with a lanterner guy named Jack, who's going around the town and immediately starts singing about cheering up and looking at the bright side of things. So, obviously, this is going to be a musical, considering that the movie starts off as one. So, as he rides through the town, we meet one of our three kids, Georgie, who is getting ready to have some fun, or, just go on little misadventures. And while that's going on, their mother and, or sorry, not mother, I guess, yeah, their aunt, Jane, and their father, Mr. Banks, I don't know what his first name is, so I'll just refer to him as Mr. Banks. But these lawyers head over and say that this house will be repossessed in a certain number of days. In fact, they have 5 days exact to find this deed that has been lost among their things. And this came from them falling behind on their money payments. So the kids overhear this, and the three of them, when getting money to get the groceries, the three of them go on about their business. Meanwhile, Mr. Banks sings about his past and how his wife used to, be there for him, and how she used to essentially help him with all these things, and now he's sort of lost his way. Pretty slow song there. And his sister joins him in this little song as they're the two of them looking for the deed, or I don't think it was a deed, but these like stocks or whatever it is that they needed to get exactly to essentially prove, I guess, that they still own the house or whatever. Anyways, while that's all going about, Georgie comes across this kite. He sees it catch wind. He starts chasing after it. It goes up all up in the air, all magic-like. And thus, when he proceeds to continue to give chase, they see that Mary Poppins arrives via kite and starts to float down. So, it's interesting because apparently the two adults in this, the brother and the sister, already know who Mary Poppins is. Apparently they were the two of however many kids that were in the original. They were the original kids. Now they are the adults. Now they have their three kids. I assume that there was two kids since they are the two represented here. And Mary Poppins proposes that she will be their nanny. And thus they arrive at the house, and we meet the other two kids, Annabelle and John. Oh, we did meet them earlier, but we learn more about them as she starts to, that being Mary Poppins, sing about what is real and what is fake as she's preparing the kids for a bath. So, John is a character that is a bit more on the, he mostly wants to help out Annabelle is the most skeptical one of the three, and Georgie is all up on board as soon as she even arrives. So, while that's all going on, the two siblings, the elder siblings, continue to look for the paper, while Georgie moves around and the other two are just, doing their little thing as well. So, Jane and Mr. Banks are still looking and so forth and so on. Uh, and from there, the leader of the bank, they arrive to them, or vice versa, I should say. And we meet Mr. Wilkins. Mr. Wilkins, after this little meetup, burns their paper that they were searching for. Not the main one, but one of these smaller papers that I guess would have given them more time. I'm not actually sure what the point of that paper was, but nonetheless, it's very clear that we have our villain of the story now, Mr. Wilkins. And we also have our time. And I think it's safe to say at this point that this Disney movie plays it pretty safe all throughout. You have your typical villain, you have your typical setup for time pretty early on, and there are definitely other elements that make it seem like this Disney movie played it really safe. Nonetheless, John and helps one of the other nannies when they return from their little bath. And he proceeds to go to this little bowl thing and tells the sister this plan about how they're gonna, they're gonna make the money for the parents, essentially. Meanwhile, Mary talks with John, the lantern guy, and meanwhile, the kids are inside all yelling at each other because Georgie wants to protect the bowl, and the other two are, John in particular wants to use the bowl to essentially pay off this debt. So they break the bowl, and then Mary Poppins and John step inside, and they see that the bowl is broken. So they proceed to bring the kids inside the bowl. In which case she starts to sing again, and they make this circus tent, and as she goes up, the song starts to change, and she changes her costume, and they start to sing about the meaning of books. The typical don't judge a book by its cover, which is a pretty decent moral to teach by standards of both kids and even adults, because, yeah, obviously. So, anyways, we see that this wolf that invited them in is now trying to ploy out, bringing out Georgie specifically to capture him. So Georgie is indeed captured, and Annabelle and John give chase. They crack the bowl further, and this happens while they're giving chase in this unorthodox Disney chase scene. Chase scenes are usually a trope of action movies, but it is here. Nonetheless, the two, John and Annabelle, go to save Georgie. And meanwhile, there's like a little other song afterwards or somewhere in between about singing about the past again. But this time Mary Poppins is singing it. And as they make their way out, they see that the scarf that she tied around was put into the urn. So they start to believe that these visions that they're getting, these little fantasies, are like really based off of things that are happening. Meanwhile, Jane bumps into into Jack, the lantern guy, and they start to hit it off pretty early on. But Mr. Banks is moving on ahead with things he's got to do. So the kids proceed to follow Mary, and at this point, by the time they fix the bowl, I'm just gonna say it now, the three kids essentially become one character at this point in time. After they fix the urn, they're like, or whatever it was, this piece of china, they're all like, we're all gonna help, and they all become this, like, they stop becoming their own unique characters, unfortunately. So, while that's going on, Mary Poppins heads to one of her relatives, her cousin apparently, their shop, or her shop, and this particular shop can't fix items unless it's a very specific every other Wednesday or something rather along those lines, because everything in her shop goes upside down. So they sing about it, and they start to face upside down while being upside down to be right side up. So after all that, and more helping of Jack and Jane and their little love possibilities are happening in the background there. Anyways, the kids go off afterwards, and Mary's off, and the kids start to do their little thing. So anyways, John sees Mary, and then he's like, he's gonna take them home or whatever. And as they're trying to proceed home, they start to get lost. So they're in the dark. The three of them are trying to head home from this location of the money not being gotten, because they wouldn't have gotten apparently any money anyways. So Jack is there conveniently, and he's fixing a light, and he swings on down to the three of them and proceeds to go into this big old dance number with his fellow lanterners in the longest dance sequence I think I've ever seen. Mary joins them, and this sequence goes on for far too long. After they arrive, after that really long sequence, they arrive home, and Mr. Banks yells at them. He breaks down, he starts to cry, he's getting all emotional. While Jack is continuing to help Jean through her ordeal. So Georgie goes to get the kite as they are getting ready to unpack everything. And what do you know it, the thing that they were searching for, which are apparently the shares, I just wrote that down later on in my notes, is exactly what they needed. So they've had the thing that they needed all along, or at least Georgie did, and he didn't even realize it. So they realize, though, that time is of the essence. They're actually running out of time. So the kids, along with Mary Poppins, suggest to turn back time. Here, the Larrys, I believe they are called proper, the Lantern crew, go up these several ladders, and the kids are just sort of on the sidelines at this point, and they get all the way to the tower, this Big Ben tower, where they're getting ready for like the final bell. And Mary Poppins uses her iconic umbrella to make her way up there much faster, and helps to proceed with getting them to the handle part of the clock tower. And while all that's going on, the adults are trying to get the message to the bad guy from earlier, Mr. Wilkins. They use the kite to their advantage, but that helps them very little. Actually, it actually ends up blowing in with a little assist from Mary Poppins. So, apparently, they are missing the most important part. The signatures is the only thing that got left behind. But, as it would have it, the original owner comes out and starts to, well, first fire the guy, and then he starts to singing about something or other. Still having a kick in his step and all that stuff. And in the meanwhile, we get a family outing after their little celebration. They're now visiting the park, and this old lady offers all of them balloons, and they start to lift up. As they sing about, there's only one place to go but up. And Jane and Jack hook up as all those pre-mentioned little moments between those two, they're now together, I guess. And they have their house back, and that is when Mary Poppins leaves, as her job is now officially done. And that was Mary Poppins Returns. And I do think that this movie is your whimsical, very for a younger audience, teaching those pretty basic morals without. They try to set up this whole, these bigger stakes of, they have a certain amount of time. The kids are, disagreeing and bickering. And, they got lost. They try to raise these stakes, but I think it's presented in such a way where it never feels like those stakes are really actually ever that high, considering technically they already had the answer this whole entire time. That doesn't really necessarily help, but watching a movie like this is definitely even more interesting after watching Mr. Banks, Saving Mr. Banks, that movie about the making of the original, and how, the writer of the original was all about not having anything be animated, as well as not even being a musical in the first place. And seeing, I don't know, they showed little clips of Mary Poppins, the original, so I do know that that is a musical which is also animated, so I do know that that ended up happening at the very most, even though I did not see the original. So with this, I do think that most of the songs are pleasant, although I will say the Leary song went on for far too long, and the book one, the third story that they were telling, also went on for a bit far too long. He even openly admits that, being Jack, the one who's singing at this point, openly admits that this is a long story, and even when he is trying to sing about, just telling the overarching story, it takes quite a bit of doing, and takes a bit of time away from other elements that could have been improved upon, including, I think, making the kids stand out a bit more. I think that is one of the issues this movie faces, is that after the sequence where they fix the bull, as I mentioned then, the three kids sort of become this one entity. They're all like, yay, Mary Poppins, and we'll just follow along until the end where we do nothing. I do think the kids could have played a bigger part in the ending, as well as, again, make them more unique from each other. Even if it's doing things that are a little bit over the top and a little bit cliche, that's totally fine. It's a Disney movie that's meant for kids, obviously, through its the way it's presented. So I think going a little bit over the top is totally fine. I think having Annabelle being, she was sort of at the very beginning sort of this very analytical character. She's like, this can't possibly be real. I think they should have driven that little bit of her character throughout most of the movie. Try to explain everything away. Try to say, oh, this is how this happened, and how this is how this happened. You can have really comical moments with that type of character archetype. And for John, I feel like he was the one who's pushing the furthest away. And again, I think they could have pushed that even further as well. You could have even had him be like, I don't even want to help, because he's so hurt by the fact that they lost their mom, that he's trying to rebel, he's trying to act out, he's trying to be the cool kid, give him that sort of attitude. And then you have Georgie, who's the optimistic of the three. So now you have these three kids that are very different from each other. You have three different things, and you have your Mary Poppins, who has to figure out how to interact with three different kids instead of three different kids at the beginning, becoming one sort of character, unfortunately, as the movie kind of goes along with in this case. So yeah, some of the musical numbers, as I mentioned, do drag on a little bit too long, and I do think that does allow the characters to suffer from the lack of time that they get. And again, the stakes are kind of just, they kind of fade away when you really think about, what they're trying to accomplish and how easy it actually was, all things considered. Probably should have made it a little bit more difficult. I don't know. But nonetheless, I still think it's a pretty okay movie. It's just that it needed quite a bit of work to get to a solid movie. So, due to the technical and writings, the writing as well, I think this leans itself to being a 5 out of 10. Because I do think that there are moments that do work. I do think that some of the rest of the musical numbers are fine as they are. I think Mary Poppins as a character herself is totally fine. She does, the actress that plays her is totally fine. Her musical numbers are totally fine. Her as a character is totally fine. Mr. Banks, even himself, the moments he gets, that emotional moment, the moment where he yells, the moment where he loses it, all points fine and good. The whole side story with Jack and Jane being a thing, I guess, is okay enough as it is. I mean, I didn't know if they were like a childhood crush in the first movie. I wouldn't know. If that really continued over, that would have been a really impressive feat to see them actually still have that little connection and have it actually pay off towards the end there. So yeah, I think they handled the adults pretty fine. The kids unfortunately suffered, and the weight of the movie is not that present. But as a musical movie, I do think it is fine. Out of the many songs that are present, only having 2 of them being too long isn't that bad. Having the rest of them being totally fine. So again, that's a 5 out of 10 from me for Mary Poppins Returns. And if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out that link in the description. I'll head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone, bye-bye.